our Presbyterian, he's Church of Scotland in his upbringing, but now he's a minister, or the chief resident minister at the Diego Martin United Church. And he knew about that from the presentation. I met him 20 years ago when we entered the seminary in 1993, and I want to invite him. Not to sing, but to talk.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all. And just a slight correction, as was mentioned earlier, my dear brother, Father Ashley Mondal, is not celebrating 12 years of ministry today. He's celebrating 12 years of ministry in the Anglican Church, because he was ordained as a Presbyterian before and ministry for at least 8 years in the Presbyterian Church before. So as we're on the topic of ecumenism, that has to be corrected. I was very pleased to hear Dr. Johnson talk about the work at the Church of the Annunciation in Santa Rosa and of the church where I now serve as minister, the Diego Martin United Church. And I wish to address the issue of wounds to the ecumenical movement in a very practical way. Back in April 2012, I sent an email to the Secretary of the Christian Council of Trinidad and Tobago, because the Diego Martin United Church was sponsored by the Caribbean Conference of Churches in the early 1970s, when the Caribbean Conference of Churches came into effect. And you were asking about our membership on the Christian Council, and I was told that an answer would be given on the 11th of May 2012. But apparently the 11th of May is the day before the 12th of never. And the Christian Council, in my opinion, only seems to do one thing once a year, having the Christmas crush, and then having it away from everybody, where nobody knows and nobody really cares, and is not really affecting anybody in this country. Wounds to ecumenism. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Mr. Granado was talking about the Corfu Agreement between the Church of England and the Lutheran churches, Church of Sweden, Church of Denmark, and Church of Norway. There was an agreement down here between the Methodist Church of the Caribbean and the Americas and the Anglican province of the West Indies for full union and communion with each other. And a service was planned. I actually saw the order of service was planned for the full union and integration of the Methodist and Anglican churches. A few months ago, I asked a senior Methodist cleric about that, because it never came off, it never came into being. And I asked why. And he said, well, the churches in the Caribbean felt that they should wait on Europe and America. And that has been the story of the Caribbean church. As V.S. Naipaul said, that the West will always be setting objective standards to which we in the third world can never live up. We are always waiting on churches in Europe and North America to set the pace. Well, they have set the pace. Our own Moravian church in the East and West Indies province have entered into full communion with the Episcopal Church in the United States, but nothing with the Anglican Brethren in the Caribbean. And they've entered into full communion with the Lutheran churches as well. We are waiting on them to set the pace. The Presbyterian Church USA has a limited communion with the Episcopal Church in the United States. There is nothing being done in the Caribbean. In France, last year was consummated in June, the full union and communion between the Lutheran and Reformed churches of France. We hear nothing in the Caribbean. My own church, the Church of Scotland in Scotland, last year established a joint commission on doctrine with the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland, and they came up with a joint declaration on baptism and the service for the renewal of baptismal vows. What are we doing in the Caribbean? And last year, to celebrate that event, the Ecclesia Trinidad organized a service in my own church, a service of the renewal of baptismal vows, using that service between the Church of Scotland and the Roman Catholic Church. And there's a Roman Catholic priest together with myself, Father Stephen Cummings from Ireland, a Dominican priest from Ireland, and both of us presided at the service, and we had that joint renewal of baptism. And that makes me go back to what Dr. Rowe talked about, of our communion at the level of God, the Holy Trinity, into which we are baptized. Because I was at the service of ordination for a very dear friend of mine in the Roman Catholic communion some months ago. And they were singing a hymn during communion, "You Satisfy the Hungry Heart," which we also have in our hymnary. And one verse says, "Does not one loaf, one cup declare our oneness in one Lord?" And I wrote on the program, apparently not. Because we say we are baptized and we recognize each other's baptism. We confess the same faith in the Nicene Creed. We are united at the level of Jesus Christ. But somehow we are not united because we are not united at the level of the bishops and the leadership of the church, and therefore we are deprived of communion with one another. And speaking of baptism, I had a situation last year in my own church where a young man, because of the love of his life, decided that he would convert to the Roman Catholic faith and enter into the RCIA program and was to be received into the Roman Catholic Church at Easter time. He asked for a certificate of his baptism so he can give to the priest. One was duly issued, carried it to the priest, and he came back to me and said, they will not accept it. He has to be rebaptized or baptized validly. And that's not the first time that this has occurred. And this has to stop. Because in 1979, the Christian Council of Trinidad and Tobago issued a joint certificate of baptismal recognition among all the member churches of the Christian Council. And we still have people who will not recognize the baptism of other churches and insist on a re-baptism, which is heretical and is wrong. And it hurts me to the core to see that in this day and age, that this nonsense still continues in our churches, rebaptizing our people. So there can be no ecumenism if we are not recognizing the very essence of our being as Christians. If we are not baptized, then you're not a Christian and I can't be in communion with you. And that is where we have to begin. We have reneged on all the agreements we do. We were 8 years ahead of the churches together in Britain and Ireland with that document on baptismal recognition in 1979. They came up with it in Europe, in the United Kingdom in 1987. But somehow, when we reneged on all those agreements and we've gone back into a cocoon and we do nothing, we wound ourselves. And finally, we talk about ecumenism, but ecumenism is limited only to the so-called mainstream Christian churches. The churches of an evangelical and Pentecostal nature do not really engage because they have a particular theology of a one-world church that will lead to the coming of the Antichrist and one-world government and all those connotations, and therefore are not willing to engage in dialogue with other Christian churches, moving towards full Christian unity, or at least a conciliar relationship with each other as churches have been entering into. And so we have that to deal with, and they have been very much at the forefront of educating our people against ecumenism. And we have been pandering to them because they are taking our people away from us. We have to sing like them, we have to do the things they do, we have to do the kind of liturgy they do and everything else, and interpret the scriptures the way they interpret it. Otherwise, you somehow, your church is wrong, your church is dead. And by pandering to them, we have lost a lot of momentum in the ecumenism. When we could have been miles ahead. And I want to leave you with these few thoughts. Thank you very much.
Prince Superman, who is a member of the other Presbyterian church. In this country, you have two missions. The Church of Scotland, which is, well, for one of the better description, the planter class church. And then but of course, that era has passed. Now it's a church of people.
Hello, let me just speak over me. It's one Presbyterian church now, and the Church of Scotland is also invited at least to the Synod of the Canadian Presbyterian Church. So, we have made a couple of steps actually, just not a way. I want to come back to this because I want to thank There's so much that was said. Let me thank all of them. Give them a round of applause, please. I want to just take one or two little things from what was said. Dr. Johnson spoke about less demonizing. I took note of that. That we have been taught, especially in the old colonial structures, to demonize each other. The Anglicans demonize the Catholics, demonize the Presbyterians, demonize the evangelicals, demonize the Hindus, demonize the Muslims. For us to get over that. And then from Dr. Rock's presentation, I want to remind you of what he said. We need to re-engineer the structures. That's something in my heart. You know, we talk about re-engineering all kinds of things in this world. We re-engineer business, we re-engineer government. We need sometimes to re-engineer the structures of the church. Problem is, who is going to build the cat? You know? That is always the problem. Who is going to take the first step? Who is going to say, I am going to give up my throne in order that change might begin to take place? And I noticed that our brother Gerard Granado also came around to a similar kind of need when he said that we need to be bridge builders. We need to be bridge builders. To quickly tell you some of the things that are in my heart, I think that we need to get urgent. There's a sense of urgency that we need to put into this process, and I want to quote Michael Miller, who in his Curriculum Theology said, there's a great concern for the fact that a theological vision which emerged 20 years ago with great promise and which invigorated many spiritually and intellectually appears to have floundered so badly that it has not contributed to Caribbean life in ways that we had hoped. It's 1973, we were full of hope. And I wouldn't get into all the theological implications of hope, but we were full of hope. The thing is that right now, we seem to be hopeless. There's less hope. We seem to be hopeless. And so, I want to reiterate what has been said before. We need to re-evaluate. We need to redefine yes. And we need to do that re-engineering of the structures. For example, I put down here, did we ever look at the cost of how we are going to make this ecumenical bridge? You know, we want to do it, but do we take into consideration the fact that it's going to cost? And did we ever stop to say, well, how are we going to find means to bear this cost? That is something which everybody does in every other aspect of rural planning and strategic planning these days. You look at the cost. Another thing which I don't think that we look at in the world today, in our ecumenical approaches, we have to really look at marketing. Anybody know what's the meaning of the word marketing? The church people don't know the word marketing. When are we going to learn about marketing? When are we going to learn about social networking? All of these things are tools which we need to begin to use in order to carry this process forward. And so, I don't want to be long. The last thing is that I want to close this evening by saying that I really think that one of the things which we can all do is to get back on a good Christian education program in the curriculum that is going to be that bridge building between our churches. We had Christian education programs that were very useful before we let it fall. We need to come back build back up the Christian education program. Let's start with the children and teach them that one faith, one Lord, one baptism. Thank you.
Christian education, Gerard Granado was part of a very dynamic study called Fashioning of People. But if you were to examine every priest course, you will find fashion of people under some place where they have just relegated the fashioning of people. So to ecumenical things like contact, you know where they are. They go on about educational materials that he's talking about are right here with us. But we have lost that too. So we must, somewhere along the line, if we want to do Sunday school, Christian education in our schools, in our communities, fashioning of people was truly a Caribbean document and had lots of money spent on it, but we got done. But I don't really like to talk too much. My two brothers talk. I want to hear some responses from the people of God. I don't know, there are a lot of people singing and jumping up there. I know we were very quiet, and so let us hear responses to these eloquent presentations.
Any questions?
Discussing the issue of ecumenism, in my mind, I started to wonder when in a community persons get together for a wedding service, persons of diverse regions, when persons get together for a baptism, when in a gated community they pool their resources to purchase security, and these persons who are doing it are people of God. Why at this level it happens naturally, for example, and it is not being endorsed higher up? Can you sort of give some light on that?
Called William Watt, biblical man. He speaks about a Creole ecumenism. And of course, he lived in Dominica. You will understand that. And what he means is the very thing that Stephen spoke about, that people come together in ways. There are two people to be very involved, perhaps three people. One is the late Benedict General Theodore. There are plenty ways that way. And they want only Roman Catholic faith. And so to someone who worked in the ecumenical churches was the insurance expert, and plenty ways happen. What I'm saying is that we somehow, ecumenism must be understood at all levels. And I think that's a very important part. I don't know how would see that. I knew William Swati when we were talking about it. He always talked to me about the Creole ecumenism.
Mention somewhere between what is happening on the ground and what is happening in the level of the bishops, in the leadership of the church. And that connection to me is education. Not just Sunday school education, but education at the level of doctoral levels where we can put out papers, not just papers, but practically go into the communities, study these phenomena, and then, in other words, market it, make it known, publicize it, and somehow influence from the ground up the theology at the top. Just my thoughts.
want to lead us that are seemingly at the top. But church is always about people. And what governs the church is always about God interacting with the people. But I know exactly what you mean. Here's my sister, Reverend Pam Hughes.